When you think about it, cities are probably our greatest invention. They're these sprawling, chaotic, buzzing hives of humanity. And for centuries, we've tried to understand them, to plan them out. But they always seem to have a life of their own. But what if that life followed secret rules? What if we could finally decode the hidden logic of our urban world? Well, let's find out.
All right, so if we're going to decode those rules, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're dealing with. Because really, the story of the 21st century, it's the story of the city.
Check this out. For the first time ever in human history, more than half of us, over 50% of the world's population, now live in urban areas. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't just some number on a chart. It's a massive, monumental shift. And it brings with it enormous challenges, right? From energy and infrastructure all the way to social inequality. And that brings us to the big question, really. If we're going to have any hope of building sustainable, livable cities for the future, we first have to understand how they actually work. So how do we find the order inside all that chaos?
For a long time, we thought we had the answer figured out. Academics came up with all these theories to explain the city, but it turns out those old maps had some pretty serious blank spots.
So some of the first real attempts came from fields like urban economics. And they tried to build these mathematical models that saw cities as, well, basically just collections of perfectly rational people. The idea was that everyone was trying to maximize their own utility, making the best possible trade-offs about where to live and work to get the most bang for their buck. And this is where you see this huge gap between the theory and the reality. The classic model was called the monocentric city. It pretty much assumed that everything revolved around a single central downtown. But, just look out your window. Real cities are messy. They're a polycentric sprawl with tons of different hubs of activity. That old blueprint, it just doesn't fit anymore. So yeah, these old models had some major blind spots. First, they assumed cities exist in this kind of stable, perfect balance, which, of course, they never do. They also totally ignored something called path dependence, which is just a fancy way of saying that history matters. Think of it like a river carving a canyon. The path it took yesterday decides where it's going to flow today. A city's old roads and buildings shape its future in the exact same way. And maybe the biggest flaw of all, these theories were hardly ever tested against actual, hard, real-world data. But then, something happened. A total game changer arrived on the scene that let us see cities in a completely new light. And that game changer was data. We're talking massive, unbelievable amounts of it pouring in from all these new sources. And suddenly, it gave us the power to watch the city not as some static model, but as a living, breathing system, right here in real time. And these sources are all around us. We're talking about cell phone and GPS data that shows exactly where we're all going. We've got digitized historical maps that reveal how a city's bones grew over centuries. We have social media activity mapping out our interactions, and even the data from your transit card showing the daily pulse of the whole system. Each one of these is like opening a new window into the city's soul. Now, with all this information, researchers can do something that's, well, it's incredible. They can compare dozens, even hundreds of different cities all at once. They can filter out all the noise, the local history and culture, to find the universal patterns, the hidden rules that all cities, whether it's Paris or Tokyo or São Paulo, seem to follow. So what are these universal patterns? This is where things get really fascinating. It turns out cities are governed by these surprisingly consistent mathematical laws. Okay, let's start with something called Zipf's law. It's a bizarrely predictable pattern. Here's how it works. If you rank all the cities in a country by population, the second largest city will almost always be about half the size of the biggest one. The third largest, about 1/3 the size, and so on, right down the line. And this holds true for countries all over the world. It's wild. Now, the really important thing to get here is that nobody plans this. This isn't some government policy. It's a pattern that just emerges naturally from all the complex dynamics of how cities grow. It's one of the first big clues that there's a deeper mathematical order hiding in our cities. But it doesn't stop with just population size. The data also reveals these other powerful patterns called scaling laws, and these basically describe how a city's different features change as it gets bigger. Okay, check out this super counterintuitive finding. You'd probably think that if a city's population doubles, it's going to need double the land and double the roads, right? It just makes sense. But it's wrong.
The data shows that as a city grows, its area and its road network both grow slower than its population. And what that means is that as cities get bigger, they actually get denser and more efficient. It's like there's an economy of scale built right into the fabric of urban growth. So, what does all of this mean? Well, it means we're basically witnessing the birth of a completely new way of thinking about our urban world. This quote from the physicist Mark Bartholomew, whose work is a big part of this explainer, just captures the shift perfectly. We're moving away from seeing cities as these machines that we can perfectly plan and engineer, and starting to see them as complex, self-organizing systems. Honestly, they're more like a living organism or an ecosystem. And this means the goal of this new science isn't about creating some perfect master plan or rigid blueprint for the ideal city. Instead, it's all about understanding the city's metabolism. You know, the underlying dynamics of flow and growth and interaction that actually give it life. And that leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to chew on. If a city isn't a machine that we build, but an organism that we need to cultivate, how does that completely change the way we think about planning for the future? It kind of suggests our role isn't to dictate everything from the top down, but to really understand these deep, hidden rules and then work with them, to nudge and to guide the incredible self-organizing life of the city. What do you think about that?